We have armor covering his entire body, head to toe, and we're gonna shoot it to see if it's bulletproof. Now they, of course, never tested this because they didn't have bullets. They were trying to stop swords and arrows.
It was still dark, and we took up our positions behind the trees in front of the old Glenrowan Inn where the Kellys was holed up. Constable Arthur, he told us to hold our fire, but we was all so nervous that every now and then they'd let out with a volley, and we'd answer with one. And inside you could hear the hostages screaming, and the Kellys a-cursing us, and then quiet for a while again. Then, just as the dawn came up over the hills with the gun smoke rising in the light and mixing with the fog, suddenly through the mist this thing appeared. A monster, weird and eerie, and 10 feet tall it was, with a great iron head, lurching toward us. Someone shouted, "It's a ghost!" 2 troopers broke and ran. I finally got a shot off. Just rang off him. Dowsett hollered, "It's old Nick himself. The devil, he's bulletproof. He'll get us all." And there he come, a-banging on his breastplate with the butt of his gun and calling back to his comrades, "Come out, boys, come out, and we'll do the lot of them." And out of the inn crawled Dan Kelly and Steve Hart, firing wildly. And behind them the women running from the inn screaming, and the clanging of the armor and that wild laughing from inside that iron mask while the bullets was whistling around him, bouncing off him and pouring into him, and blood gushing from his foot and arm, trying to hold his gun steady and firing into us. Finally Sergeant Steele ran up behind him and fired a shotgun blast at his legs, and Kelly reeled backwards and tottered and finally fell with a great crash, bleeding in the dust. We took off his armor and carried him inside. 28 wounds he had, and still recovered to stand trial on October 28, 1880. When Judge Barry sentenced him to die, Ned shouted, "You can't kill us all. I'll return from the grave to fight." And it's said to this day, on the ranges between Vanilla and Glenrowan, a tall, shadowy figure walks through the mist of each dawn, clanging in his armor and laughing deep and hollow in his rusted iron mask.
Oh, the banging off his shoulders and the clanging off his head. We fired 1,000,000 into him, he couldn't be lying dead. But the devil smoked his arm and his arms was back to lead. And Ned Kelly keeps a-comin', Kelly keeps a-comin'. Oh, they're banging off his shoulders and they're clanging off his head. We fired 1,000,000 into him, he couldn't be lying dead. But the devil smoked his arm and his arms was back to lead.
And I am Iron Man.
Well, hello, everybody out there. I hope you can hear us. This is the 11 Bang Bang Reload Show. I'm Garrett. I'm your host. Off to my right, we have Snapper. And down below, we have Steve from the land down under, Australia, from the channel Trooper Cody's Light Horse History, I believe is the name of your channel now, isn't it, Steve?
Yep, that's it. That's it, Garrett.
And we're going to go over a few things here. We are going to talk about Ned Kelly. And right off the bat, I'm going to tell you, you're not going to hear the version of Ned Kelly that we in America are used to, because that's mostly Hollywood hooey. We are about to dissect why everything in that cool opening just about was not real. And but I want to emphasize before we get going here, I am not against the Ned Kelly story that we get, because that's how most of us get into history, is through movies, video games, TV shows. And if they're not right, then we do the study and we find what is actually historically accurate, but that is what brings people in. And anyway, we have a few rules here. It goes for us. We keep them here on the show, and we ask you to keep them in the chat. We do keep this show family friendly because there are kids out there, and we're not injecting any modern politics into a story that happened 150 years ago. So anyway, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to the guy down here who knows the story better than any of us. Let's go, Steve. Where do you want to start? You want to start back in 1870 or 60s? Let's talk about young Ned Kelly.
What I'm going to say to start with is that I've just clicked out of watching this on my computer because already I can see things coming up where people are saying things about the introduction not being accurate. And I think that's the thing that you've already clarified right from the start. That was just an introduction. It could have been like using Disney's War Horse movie as an introduction to a light horse video. That's complete fabrication, but it was an interesting bit of film. So what you've done is the same thing. You've just shown a collection of shots of the movies and that have been produced. And what that has shown is that if you want to make a movie that's exciting, you really got to, you can't use the truth. And so the one thing that I'll start by saying is, do you notice that I'm wearing a 1800s mounted troopers uniform? And you can see, you know, the shiny buttons and the piping and the dog collar and how smart this uniform is. And so the fact is, this uniform was expensive, and the troopers in the 1800s, the cops in the 1800s, they had to buy their own uniform, and they were supposed to always look smart. And so if you were ever going out on a horse, if you were ever going on patrol, if you were Sergeant Kennedy and his men going out to look for Ned, you were going in plain clothes, not because you're a detective, but because your uniform was expensive, you didn't want to wreck it, you got back from patrol, the superintendent would crucify you for having a shoddy looking uniform. And so when the blokes went out on patrol, when they went out in plain clothes because those clothes were hardier. So that's one of the first things is you watch any Australian movie, Brian Brown, one of our great actors, he made this great movie where he's out on patrol and it's a stinking hot day and he is wearing the tunic just like this. And every opportunity he undoes the tunic, he's got nothing on underneath. Can you imagine sweating? He's got nothing on it. But the reality is they never wore their uniform. But for a movie, you have to have the coppers wearing their uniform because you want to identify them as coppers in the movie. So that's pretty much one of the first things we'll clear up, is that when the blokes were out on patrol, they were in plain clothes, not as detectives, simply to protect their uniform.
Quick question for you, Steve.
Fire away. I mean, I don't want to just keep talking constantly. So
when they did go out in their plain clothes, what did they wear that would set them apart as being a police officer? Did they wear a hat with their? Did they wear a badge on their clothes? Or was it just everybody knew everybody? So
that is the thing. That's everybody knew each other. If somebody after this is over wants to get out a map and looks at northeastern Victoria and look where Greta and Wangaratta and Jerilderie and look where all these places are, you'll see that they're incredibly close together. And I think from memory, the whole Kelly debacle only occurred 60 miles from Melbourne. And we tend to lose track of the distance by horse, traveling by horse, traveling by buggy. And that is one of the reasons why when a new copper came to town, usually there's only a 1 or 2 man country police station, they were immediately known. And when they rode around, everyone knew who they were.
Makes sense.
And wanted to make sure that they were doing the right thing or hiding something that they pinched, or because they knew who the coppers were and what they were doing.
Yeah. I'm going to go over here before we get into this too deep because I want to read some of these people's comments that are just coming in. I'm not going to read everybody's name, but everybody's saying hi. And by the way, Duke Fraser Productions is out there, guys. He's got the wrench. If anything goes south in the comments, he will remove any trolls. But I seen a couple here. They were talking about the opening was from a fictionist story. Like I said, the thing is, especially here in America, if we didn't watch anything that had any fiction in it, we would never watch John Wayne or Gunsmoke or Bonanza. So that's how people get into it, guys. Yeah. And that's how I've gotten into a lot of this. But Angelica's here. Paul Newman said, why do Australian cops suddenly sound like Chris Christopherson? Well, my question is, how come it's Paul Newman asking this question? If you want to know, guys, that is a soundtrack from the 1970 movie Ned Kelly. And believe me, I would rather listen to Chris Christopherson read the words there than have to watch Mick Jagger try to play Ned Kelly. Trust me, it's pretty sad. And
I tried doing it last night and I couldn't sit through it.
Okay. One question here we're going to start with. Oh, yeah, Garza, we're going to get to that at the end. He's talking about disarming and everything. But, all right, that's pretty well through what's going on here. People are just saying hi. Let's go back in time and let's talk about early young Australia. Let's talk about the political, not political of today, of course, but the political things that led to the Ned Kelly and the Irish, quote-unquote Irish situation that was going on at the time, even though there were many Irish on both sides. But go ahead and tell us the story.
Hesitating because of the depth of the question, really. But okay, so what you got to remember is in the period we're talking about is pre-federation, which means Australia is separate colonies and they are not necessarily working together. They're not, particularly if we talk about South Australia. South Australia was from the start never going to be a convict colony. And so South Australia holds itself snobbishly, I live in South Australia, but held itself snobbishly above the other colonies because they were convict colonies. And there were even laws introduced in South Australia to prevent people coming from Victoria and New South Wales because they could be convicts, and there were laws that then sent them back to those states. Tasmania, Van Diemen's Land, Tasmania, the island, that was Port Arthur, that was convicts. New South Wales, Botany Bay, that was convicts. Victoria was convicts. And so they were very much looking after themselves, not wanting to work with the other colonies. Because there was so many convicts and then pardoned convicts, which is what Ned Kelly's dad was. Ned Kelly's father was born in Ireland, committed a crime, sent to Van Diemen's Land, did his time, was released, then came to live in Victoria. And so that you have a very much them and us in that if you were a poor person, you were probably a convict. And if you had any money, you were wealthy, you were the wealthy class, and you didn't want anything to do with the poorer people who were probably only convicts anyway. And when the Victorian Police was first started, and I don't know if we've got any VicPol members or ex-members that are watching this, but the reality is that when the Victorian Police first started, it was only ex-convicts who became police officers. And it was way into the the 50s, possibly even into the 70s. So there was still no entrance exam to get into VicPol, no training. You turned up, you wanted to be a police officer, you were signed on, boom, sent to a country station, and you had no weapons training, no law training. You didn't even necessarily need to be able to read and write, which is quite incredible, really. But
Wow.
I'm not sure if I've got drifted off the topic, but that just while we're talking police, by the time of Ned Kelly being a teenager and moving into that era of the police were primarily Irish, and the reason that that was so heavily dominated by the Irish is that Anglo-Saxon, Australian-born people thought that the police was a job for someone, like today, as I don't know, sewer worker, something that's seen as a shocking job, a terrible job, a poorly paid job, a job with absolutely no respect, was seen. That was what the police were seen like back then. But in Ireland, where poverty and unemployment was rampant, if you were a police officer in Ireland, you were seen as lucky because, wow, you had a job and you had some money. So what happens is a flood of Irish are coming into Australia, and they are different for two reasons. One, they don't see being a police officer as being a shocking job. And also, they don't see the appalling wages that the police got in Victoria as being appalling wages because they were wages. And so that's why a huge number, somewhere in my notes, I made a note of how many, at the time of the whole Ned Kelly incident, how many police officers were of Irish descent in the Vic poll. And I think from memory, it's somewhere around 90%. It's a huge number.
Yeah. I got to read over here. Duke Fraser Productions out. He said this sounds like the cavalry of the same time period, the U.S. cavalry of the same time period. Yeah, it's just guys that are doing a job that really in reality nobody else wants to do. And I do want to point out that that's kind of the situation in America too. A lot of poor Irish immigrants hitting New York and not always being treated the best when they get here. So what did they do? They the people that were running over them were the police. And if you look at history in the 1840s, 50s, and 60s, they just overtook the police and became the police. So, but yeah, I like where you're going with that. I was going to ask you guys, we got lots of time tonight. We're not in any rush, but so we're going to go the slow way with this. How does this apply to what we talked about last time you were on here? Which, if you guys haven't seen, last time we did a great episode, big episode on Anzacs in World War I. But you talked then about Waltzing Matilda not being your national anthem. Does that have ties into this story, do you think, the song?
I think there's nothing whatsoever to do with Ned Kelly in the Waltzing Matilda. But the thing about Waltzing Matilda is that the swag man, once a jolly swag man, he was unemployed, homeless, no income, was stole a sheep, and then at the end of it all, when he's captured by the wealthy squatter mounted on his thoroughbred, the wealthy squatter is supported by the troopers 1, 2, and 3. And so it seemed that the police are working with the wealthy squatter. And so then he commits suicide. And so it's a wonderful song. It's a wonderful song to sing. And people will often get emotional and say, hey, this should be the Australian national anthem. But it's about all the wrong things. So it never can be. And really, the great point you've raised here with mentioning that is the fact that this is why so many people get emotionally tied up with Ned Kelly, because some of the Ned Kelly stuff seems to resonate with us, that it's against the government. He's beating the government, and the bloody banks, they're just, all they want is our money. They just want interest rates and all these fees and charges. And so, the thing, being an ex-copper myself, and of having had dealings with, we'll see if this has to get cut out, but having had dealings with outlaw bikers, one of the things that infuriates me is when you see a group of Hell's Angels, the hardcore 1% outlaw bikers, wearing their colours and they go into a toy shop and they buy 50 bicycles that they're going to give to the poor children of this neighborhood. It's front page coverage, and so many people say, oh, those blokes, those poor blokes, they're just misunderstood. And it makes my blood boil, because they're drug dealing, murdering, they're scum,
Right.
and they are doing something to get some good publicity, while maybe those 5 blokes are buying the bikes and the other 20 are out selling crack to teenagers, So
Exactly.
and that's the trouble, in that we see so much about Ned that makes people go, oh, he was just misunderstood, he was badly treated. But the reality is, if we just forget everything about Ned, and the one thing is that we do know, that at Glenrowan, he was going to blow up the train, tracks, so that the train crashed, and all of the coppers and everyone on it got killed as a diversion to go and rob a bank. And I mean, so you tell me Ned was a great guy and he was just misunderstood, and it was all a result of having one bad school teacher or some other ridiculous myth. And the reality is, he was going to commit mass murder as a diversion to go and rob a bank.
Yep. I was actually just talking to Snapper about this today.
About that.
In my opinion, Ned Kelly starts out as the Jesse James legend, but you can get so far down this rabbit hole of darkness that by the time that he got to Glenrowan, he was Bloody Bill Anderson. Like, he didn't care, that he didn't care if people died or not at that point. The folk hero story, it's like Bonnie and Clyde. A lot of times the folk hero story starts good, and then when you actually get down to and I'm not saying Jesse James and Ned Kelly are in any way the same. Jesse James, I actually have a lot of, not a respect, should I say, but I do. The story's different. These stories are about hardened killers who don't even necessarily hide in the population, as they're willing to kill said population should it come down to it to get what they want. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and look, I think this is why I sometimes shouldn't be on these shows, because I go off on so many tangents, because you raise things with me that I just. So the first thing is Jesse James and Ned Kelly, and you look at Jesse James and you involve the whole Kansas, Missouri interaction, you involve the Civil War, what was done over a period of years, and you can see that there is absolutely nothing that connects what the James family and all of those people in the Kansas, Missouri, and Quantrill and all of those, is you cannot compare it with just a few years of Ned Kelly setting up in a quiet northeastern Victoria where people just want to get on with their lives, starting off by setting up a organized cattle and horse stealing business that is an organized crime, where they're taking horses and cattle from Victoria, stealing people's property into New South Wales, because there's no interaction between the two police forces. They're altering the brands, committing atrocities on the animals, in some cases cutting out the brands off the animals. They're bringing them back to Victoria, and they're getting away with this. And they're making so much money from it, and they're doing that over a period of time. You can't compare that to what happened with Jesse James.
And at the same time,
the other thing is that, because you have brought it up, I'm not going to let it slip past. You brought it up. Is the other thing is, again, being an ex-police officer, is the fact that the Bonnie and Clyde movie comes out, and they pick a heartthrob like Warren Beatty, and they pick Faye Dunaway, gorgeous, and they have these two actors portraying this movie in a glamorous way. And the reality is, let's talk about a man who can't get a job, and he's just got married, and he manages to get a job as a policeman, and he goes out on patrol on a motorbike with another man, and the two of them, and they're riding along on now I'm going from memory here, so if I get any of this wrong, feel free to have a go at me. But basically, here we have this new, just policeman, only just been a policeman a very short time, a matter of days possibly. He's out on patrol on a nice sunny Sunday on his motorbike, and they see a car off to the side, and they think they'll go over and check it out, and they've got shotguns on their motorbikes. They ride up and they get off their motorbikes, and they just calmly walk up to the car just to see if they get broken down, do they need any help, and then without any warning, they're gunned down and killed, and it's Bonnie and Clyde and the other person's name I forget. They jump in their car and they race off. They killed them without any warning, and that poor guy was in one of very first few days of employment as a policeman, very first few days of his marriage to his wife, obviously. And if there's any small saving grace, it is that one horrific murder is what finally changed the attitude of people. They got that story in the papers, and finally people, instead of going, oh wow, Bonnie and Clyde, they're just misguided, they're only pinching a few bob, they're robbing and Clyde, and it's not true. They were psychopaths as well. And I'm a big fan of Frank Harmer. So
yeah, I'll say this, that there was a farmer that saw that killing. Otherwise, it may have never been put out the way it was. And I believe it was Bonnie that said that as she shot because they gunned the guy down before they left, she walked up and shot one of them in the head with a pistol and commented, the man heard her comment that his head bounced off the pavement like a rubber ball. And that little comment right there was enough for people to realize, hey, whereas John Dillinger may hide in the public, these people will kill the public and hide behind them too. So, but that's a little more modern. Let's go back and talk about into this situation, or caused this situation. Young Ned Kelly comes on the scene, and let's talk about him, and let's go back to him in power. Let's go back to his early bushranger days.
Okay, so I think that I'll take a tiny step back further in that even before 1849 from memory is when a magistrate is out riding, and he is stopped by a man who he instantly recognizes as Power, and he's robbed. And because the magistrate was only out riding, checking his own property and his stock, he had no money on him, and so Power stole his watch, which was a family heirloom and meant a lot more than money did to the magistrate. And the magistrate says that it was approximately 14-year-old Ned Kelly who was with Power. And so that's the first official crime that's recognized against Ned. But before that, there was one official court matter, which was where you can look it up for yourselves if you're interested. A person was arrested and taken to court for stealing sheep. And when he appeared in court, he called a witness, and a young boy came forward and said that they weren't stolen sheep, they were his sheep. And that young person that was a witness for the person in court was a very young Ned Kelly. And when the prosecutor asked why was it then that the sheep had no brand, and that was Ned's reply was that he'd raised them as pets. And so that's in the official Victorian records, that Ned was in court and fibbed to give somebody else an alibi or a defense, to give somebody else a defense, because that person then got off the stock stealing charge. And then the next thing is 14 with Power. And again, people might say that when Power was actually caught and that magistrate had to give evidence in court, he was a magistrate. He had to swear on the Bible unequivocally that that person with Power was Ned Kelly, and he said he couldn't swear on the Bible that it was Ned. Now, there's two things about that. One, it is either that he was being completely honest and on the Bible, was only prepared to say, look, I think it was Ned. But the other thing, the other theory, I guess, is that what do you do if you've got a gang of outlaw bikers that live just down the road from you? Do you deliberately provoke them? And so the other argument is that Ned was living near where his property was, and he was hoping not to provoke Ned Kelly into even more crime by if he just said, look, I'm not sure if it was Ned or not. So that's the incident with the stolen pocket watch and why Power got convicted for it, but why Ned didn't.
Well, tell us about Power a little bit, because when I picture this guy, I picture me, short, fat, and can't walk.
Yeah, I think there's not a lot I know about Power because I've never researched his background, but he was a criminal, a hardcore life criminal, if you like, in New South Wales, and he was doing hard time, and while he was in not sure of which prison, but while he was in prison in New South Wales, he escaped, and of course, a wanted man in New South Wales, he is going to go to another colony, so he came to Victoria, and he took up his stealing, bushranging again, and sometimes was going back into New South Wales and Victoria and robbing anyone. And the thing about Power, and when Ned was with him, it was always acknowledged that Power had a young associate with him. And when the stories come up about Ned Kelly being a Robin Hood who robbed from the rich and gave to the poor, the thing is that the Power and Ned even after Power, they just robbed anyone. If they came across somebody traveling back from town having sold 2 dozen eggs and they had 10 shillings and sixpence on them, they stole that 10 and 6. You know, they stole saddles, they would steal anything, as they stole the magistrate's pocket watch. And Power, his biggest downfall, so when the magistrate says, I'm not 100% sure it was Ned, Power, getting back to your main point, was instantly recognizable because of infected, huge bunions on his feet, which was so painful, it made it hard for him to walk, and he had difficulty walking, and that made him instantly recognizable.
But on a horse, he was something else, so they say. He could really go.
I think there's something else that stems back to what I've talked about before about the light horse, is that people lose track of the fact that there were no cars, and that some people were, that some kids would have been barely able to walk when they climbed up a fence post and got onto the horse's back, and they couldn't put a saddle on because they were too small and they couldn't do it up, so they just rode bareback. And so many of these people became the most amazing natural horsemen, which is what, there's a recorded incident by a police officer whose name I forget, but Ned was cautioned for the offence of furious riding. And the furious riding, I don't know, in Australia we have an offence with your car driving in a manner dangerous to the public, which is an offence you could be charged with. So in America, I'm sure when somebody does a massive burnout in the car park and there's lots of people around, there must be a charge in America now that the cops can charge someone with that.
Reckless driving.
Reckless driving. So what it used to be called before cars was furious riding, the offence of furious riding. And so there's a case where Ned was showing off a wild, unbroken horse that he was on, and he was riding that without a saddle. He was riding it bareback outside the church. There were witnesses. A police officer came along, told him to stop doing it. And when Ned dug his spurs into that horse, and the horse then was bucking and appeared to be out of control. That is another reason that they say Ned developed a hatred for the police, because he was embarrassed by the policeman making him appear not to be such as good a rider as he really was.
So does he go to jail for that, or is that just a temporary fine type thing?
And that I can't remember. I am pretty sure that was a caution. Okay. So this is one of the times when you've got me on something that I can't remember the policeman's name, because this was one of the things where the policeman made a decision that if he didn't actually report him for it, Ned might behave a bit better. And but it didn't work. Instead of having the desired effect that I'll give you a caution for something and perhaps you'll be a better person, he took it as an affront that it happened in the first place and held a grudge against the officer.
Yeah,
I should have made up. I wish I'd made up a bit of a chart beforehand where I could have put.
You're doing
police.
You're doing just fine. You're
doing great. Fine. A matter of fact, before we go anymore, I think everybody should at least say, thank you, Steve. This is your second live show, isn't it not?
Yeah.
And so you're doing a great job. This is not that easy, and it's a little scary at first. And I just want to say you're doing a great job, Steve. And keep it up, buddy.
Thanks, Snapper. That's very kind of you. Yeah, thank you.
Kim Linder said the policeman's name was Steve Sapaskis.
Oh. No, don't. You'll have to cut that out. He shouldn't have said that. And, no, he shouldn't have said that. And
I did it all wrong, didn't I?
Yeah. So let's move on from.
Moving on. See, I don't know how to cuss in any language. Moving on.
So
okay.
You can tell Kim he just got his wrist slapped for saying that. And next time we'll pinch him for it.
Okay, you got that, Duke? No cussing in any language. Anyway, moving on. Let's go on down into, where are we at now? We are after the first horse offense. So what happens next?
Oh, I think I might have got sidetracked there, because what actually happened was so the organised horse stealing, cattle stealing, that is taking place over a couple of years in northeast Victoria, and Kelly and a few of his associates, and I think that was that's Joe Byrne, Jim Kelly, and Aaron Sherritt. They were the ones that they met in prison, and that group then becomes involved with Ned in the organised horse cattle stealing, and that is going so well that there aren't many official records of what actually happened there, because no witnesses came forward to talk about it. It is simply the fact that a police officer in New South Wales, in the colony of New South Wales, he becomes suspicious, and I think he's from the town of Wangaratta, Albury, Wodonga, but just over the river. He becomes suspicious about the cattle and horse trade, and starts, a guy called Whitney has some horses stolen. They trace the brands. They set up this massive sting operation where they're going to catch the whole gang, and through informers, police informers are people helping the police, but through spies, the Kellys find out that that's going to happen. And so the sad part is that they then kill all the horses. And so when the police try to carry out this sting where they hoped to catch all of these rustlers, the criminals, what they end up finding are just masses of primarily horses, dead horses, carcasses that have been burnt, other carcasses that have been decapitated, other carcasses shot and drowned in the river. And that really is a period of a couple of years where it suddenly comes to an end, virtually no one's caught, and they move on to bank robbing, really. That's really where it goes from there. And one of the things I wanted to talk about a little earlier is early in his career, I've got a few names down here because I just wanted to mention these names for people that think that he's such a great guy, and I know I'm not going to be able to find him. So, okay, so early in his criminal career, there's a wool sorter that is robbed by Ned, and the matter's prosecuted and go to court. And the wool sorter's name was Joseph Bulwelski. And when the matter goes to court, the wool sorter doesn't turn up for court. And not only doesn't he turn up, he's never, ever heard of again anywhere. So it's assumed that he was murdered and dumped and his body was never found. And then a couple of sheep herders were robbed, and one was Murphy and one was O'Leary. So these guys were robbed, and they pressed charges with the police, and it was prosecuted. And when it went to court, and they were due to turn up in court, those two didn't turn up and were never heard of again. And so this doesn't get too boring. A Chinaman was robbed of £5 on his way from was robbed by £5, came to the police and said that he was robbed by Ned Kelly. And because people couldn't pronounce his name properly, he was recorded by the police as first name A-H, surname F-O-O-K, which, you know, if you write that down, you can see that it comes out as Orfook. Let's call it Orfook is his name. And again, when that comes to court, the Chinaman doesn't turn up and is never found and never heard of again. And they're just four names that I quickly wrote down because I wanted to actually mention four names when people say that, as I'll say later on, that anyone who was ever going to be a witness against Ned Kelly disappeared and their body was never found. And if people say that's not true, well, there's four names of four people that you can go and look up the official court files and see that that's what happened with those four. And so, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's fine.
What were we saying?
I think that's interesting because you're not talking about wealthy landowners and you're not talking about police and you're not talking about government officials. And when people get to the point where people are showing up dead that are just the common people, I almost find it hard to believe that Ned Kelly could hang out as long as he could because, you know, people do turn on you when you start doing stuff like that. And they did. They started to.
I keep coming back to this because it is such a perfect example that if you witnessed a crime, and anyone who's watching this, I want you to think about this for yourself, that if you witness a crime, you are standing near an ATM and you saw a person come up to a person at the ATM and rob them, and you clearly saw that person's voice, you clearly saw their face and you recognized them, and you would stayed there and you were a witness for the police, and the police took your witness statement. And then you were at home, and I'm going to say this is a male, you're at home with your wife and your three little kids who are all just going to school, and there's a knock at the door, and you go to the door. And when you open the door, there are three enormous outlaw bikers standing on your doorstep, and perhaps they're just holding aluminium baseball bats each. And when you look behind them, there's another 12 sitting on their motorcycles out in the front of your house. And one of those guys says to you very nicely, look, that was our brother who robbed that man, and we understand that you are a witness and you are going to tell the police that you got it wrong and you didn't see a person. You're going to withdraw your statement, and we'll all be fine, won't we? You know, perhaps here's my police baton, and he's perhaps got his baseball bat like this. And you think to yourself that this is 2022, and I've got a mobile phone, and I've got police in police cars, and I'm not going to be put under this pressure by these people. I'm going to, or are you going to think to yourself, my God, I want my kids to be able to go to school safe. I want my wife not to be pack raped by 6 blokes 3 weeks down the track. And that, if that example, you ask yourself, what would you honestly do? And so that is what the real truth is about Kelly, is people knew that these blokes were mad, that they were ruthless, that they had absolutely nothing to lose. And so the people weren't, some people, yes, were supporting them through family friendship ties, but by far the majority was so scared of them, they simply turned a blind eye, did what the Kellys said, didn't want to antagonize them, and hoped they just would leave them alone. And so that's why he got away with what he did, because again, I've said earlier in this, have a look at a map of the area we're talking about, in northeast Victoria, and see how small it is. And you'll know that if the Kellys were roaming this area and you lived there, you just hoped they left you alone, and you would never say a bad word about them, because there's maybe one policeman with a horse 20 miles away, even if he's 10 miles away. You know, there's no communication, you've got no phone. And so that is why people think the Kellys were well supported by the local community. They had terrorized the local community. That's what it was.
Okay. That
makes sense.
It does. I've never heard any of this part of the story before.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. We're going to get a different angle of the story than we're used to hearing.
He didn't lie, did he?
Nope. What happens next in the story?
I think, well, we go into now where he commits a couple of bank robberies, and the idea is not to do it like you would see in a Western, where ride into town and either shoot up the town or ride in, can't tie up the horses. It's go in very early in the morning and just simply take the whole town hostage. And so that happened at a couple of places. Jerilderie is the best example, you know, where he just takes everybody hostage and does what he likes for, I think it's about 24 hours or more that he's actually in Jerilderie holding the town hostage while he goes to the post office and the bank and robs the place. But that's again, we're in a very small space of time, and so the horse business failed, had to come to a close, and we rob a couple of banks and we get a lot of money. But equally, the thing about being a criminal is it's not cheap to live when you're a criminal. And so the money's going quickly, and they're wasting money. They also, you know, there are accounts of them going into hotels and spending vast sums of money buying drinks for the whole bar and that sort of thing, where they spend a lot of money, clearly ill-gotten. But there's not a great deal of time now between when he commits those bank robberies and we get to I suppose we come to Stringybark next, is the next most important thing to talk about.
Yeah. Sam Sebastian down here asked us if we missed Constable Fitzpatrick incident that triggered the Kelly boys into disappearing into the what would become the Stringybark situation. You remember that story? I believe it has to do with his wife, or his mom and his sister, not his wife. Sorry, go ahead. Something like that.
Yep. Look, I'm pleased somebody brought that up, because that is such an important. My head's spinning trying to get all of the information out. So we have this young, handsome. The photographs fortunately exist of this policeman, so that we know he was a young, dashing, good-looking man, and he knows that Ned's brother Dan is wanted for an offence, and he is coming back to the police station that he's stationed at and from being on some other duty. And as he's coming back, he knows he has to pass the Kelly shanty. So when I say Kelly shanty, that's Ned's mother, Ellen, has a I don't know what you would call this, maybe a moonshine, I don't know. But in Australia, we had sly grog, and that is where you sell alcohol to the public illegally. That's basically what it is. So Ellen had a shanty, a one-room shanty, divided into rooms with blankets and material. And from that, she had at least one prostitute that worked there and sold liquor illegally. Now, the constable's coming back, and he is going to pass the shanty. The superintendent, I think it was Nichols, but I might have that wrong, but the superintendent had issued the order to the police station that the Kellys are liars and fabricators, and they will dob you in and make allegations up against you. Never, ever will a police officer go to the Kelly shanty by himself. So what happens is he is coming back, he's going to pass the shanty, and he thinks, I'll go in and see if Dan's there, and if he is, I'll arrest him. On his journey...
That guy's got some cojones.
Sorry?
That guy's really got some cojones to do that, especially after everything else going on. That's pretty crazy.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because it's you've got to, having been a cop, there's macho issues and there's dumb issues and not thinking issues. So the Royal Commission, shortly after Kelly was hung, went into all of this and took witness statements. So there is a legal tavern, pub, a legal place to sell alcohol between where the officer left to ride past the shanty. He stops for a drink at a hotel. When he stops there, he has the licensee serves him a lemonade and brandy. He serves him one drink. Now the guy was out riding, had a day's trip ahead of him. He stops and he has one drink of brandy and lemonade, and then heads back past the shanty. I tell you that Royal Commission says he only had one drink because later on the Kellys, liars, fabricators, trying to get away with things, they say when the officer arrived at the shanty he was drunk. The licensee later at the Royal Commission says he had one lemonade and with a bit of brandy in it. When he goes there to arrest Dan, Ellen is there and Kate is there, her 14-year-old daughter, Ned's 14-year-old sister. So the officer wants to arrest, finds Dan there, shocked, really, he probably wasn't expecting it, but Dan is there, goes to arrest Dan. Ned is there as well. Ned shoots the policeman, and the bullet hits the policeman in the wrist. This is all about guns that are cap and ball. So it was a weak charge. If it had been a full charge done properly, it would have blown his hand off. But it was a weak charge, so the bullet lodged in his wrist. He has his pistol taken off. He tries to reach for his own handgun. He has that taken off him by Dan. Then a big discussion takes place about whether or not Ned and Dan are going to kill the copper or not. Through dialogue, pleading, don't do this, you'll be crazy to kill a policeman, they bandage his wrist and they let him go. He then leaves, but instead of going where he was going, he heads back from the direction he came. I'm telling you this because what does he do? He stops at that same pub where he was the first time, where he had the lemonade and brandy, where the licensee re-bandages his wrist and sees he's suffering from shock and gives him a whiskey. He then gets to town, sees a doctor. The doctor treats the wound. And in the Royal Commission, that doctor says he smelt whiskey on the policeman's breath. So again, this is what feeds this story that the policeman was intoxicated when really this licensee. Okay, so I'm trying not to get in too much detail that nobody wants to hear, but basically, of course, what happens is that the Kellys make up this huge. Now, I don't know if this in Australia we'd say they make up this huge bullshit story, which is that he came there drunk, he inappropriately fondled and caressed the 14-year-old Kate, and that when he saw Dan, he immediately pulled his weapon and started threatening Dan with his handgun. And that's the excuse they make up for what transpired. That's their version of what happened. And we have a very, very famous artist in Australia. He's our Banjo Patterson is our poet, and Sidney Nolan is our artist. And Sidney Nolan did some paintings of some Kelly paintings, and in one of those paintings, he paints a picture of the officer with his arm round Kate at the shanty, you know. And so there you have a really respected artist perpetrating myth by doing a painting of something that never ever happened.
Mm-hmm.
So that's that.
That's interesting because I've never heard the commission side of it. I've only heard the other side. So you are informing us here. We have a couple people over here. Garza said, "I wonder if they're going to talk about the armament both parties were armed with at the time." And A American said, "I'd like to know what types of firearms they had too."
I say we'll get there. We'll get there.
Yeah. We are getting there because we're about to get into the next fight, which is, I think that's pretty well documented what firearms were involved in that. At least I think so. I don't know.
Once again, Steve, you're doing great, man. This is awesome. I've never heard this. I've never dug too deep into the Ned Kelly story. Mm-hmm. And I've always heard the side what makes Ned Kelly the dashing hero and not the villain. And this is very interesting. This is very, very, very interesting.
I've said this before already. I might have said it twice, but I'm just going to say it again. The reality is, and don't we all to some degree like hey, let's say Jack Reacher. If you're a reader, what about Jack Reacher? You know, people think, oh, you can't get justice through the courts and the police, right. But Jack Reacher will get your justice because he doesn't mind. He gets a bad guy. He'll put a bullet in the back of the bad guy's head. You know, so part of us wants to see justice, or maybe we like to a degree we like a bad guy, or in theory we like a bad guy. But so many people in Australia sort of semi-worship Ned Kelly because they think he was standing up against the establishment and fighting the tax man and
where do you think that started in the first place? Do you think it was the friends and family of Ned Kelly that first started this whole he's the good guy and the police were the people stepping past the bounds and he's just, you know, trying to make ends meet and they're just picking on him and he had to take his? But when do you think this all started? Do you think it was after, or do you think this all started during?
No, I'm 100% certain that this is all afterwards.
Afterwards.
As I say beforehand, most people, it was fear tactics, and most people were just terrified that something would happen to them. Their stock would be stolen. You know,
that says a lot. I mean, that actually says a lot. Once somebody's gone, then they become a hero. That says, you know, quite a bit on what really happens. Versus if he was this hero when he was alive to everybody, that says something a little different.
Yeah, and that I think you look at all of our legendary characters through history. We Robin Hood. I don't know about your Daniel Boone and Davy Crockett and things like that, but some of the stories that are made up about them I'm not saying they were bad guys in any way. What I'm simply saying is that the mythology that builds up around some of these people afterwards, and it's like people. You see people walking around proudly wearing Ned Kelly T-shirts, and they've got Ned Kelly busts in their houses, and that, you know, the statues in their houses, and you know, I have to confess, I've been all of those towns. I've been to Jerilderie to see where the hostages were, and I've been to Glenrowan, and I nearly dug out a photo. I wish I had now, but I nearly dug out a photograph so that I can show you. My wife is standing on the very spot where the sign says by the railway tracks that this is where Ned fell, and where the Anne Jones, I think, where the pub was. And so I've been and I've looked at all these things, and I've got photos of my car parked alongside the enormous Ned Kelly statue where he's standing there with his revolving rifle, and so it generates enormous income for those areas from the tourist industry. But
of course,
you know, if I can just say this, and if it's inappropriate, then it can be cut out. But really, I'm thinking if you went to Europe now, you can go and visit Auschwitz. Now, that is not saying that that's a good place.
Oh, that's a good place,
no
right?
way praising that. It's simply saying that you can go there and see it. So that's
it's a historical, significant location, right?
Yeah.
But back to what you guys were saying, Duke down there just typed what I was thinking, and he quoted the man who shot Liberty Valance. He said, "When the legend becomes fact, print the legend." That's exactly what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
So we're moving on here, where the Kelly boys, obviously, the Fitzpatrick is not murdered, but that puts them on the run, does it not? I guess they were already on the run, but
yeah.
Just kind of put them in a different category of on the run.
Yeah, they're wanted for ever spiraling offences. I guess that's really what it boils down to. And so they had all, I shouldn't say all, Dan and Ned had already done time. They knew what it was like. And again, I have a photograph. I've been to Beechworth, which is where the prison still exists. And thank goodness they've never changed the prison from what it was like when Ned was in there. And you can go in Beechworth prison, and you can go into the cell that was Ned Kelly's cell. So, you know, I've been in there, but you can imagine what it must have been like in the hot weather and the cold weather to be in these huge stone, ghastly penitentiaries where the cell that Ned was in is probably 1/3 the size of the study I'm sitting in now. And so every time the offences spiral, the reaction from them is worse. And that's really when if we get to Stringybark Creek, which is best described as 4 coppers get told, go out and see if you can find them. You probably won't. They're probably nowhere around here. Just jump on your horses, see what you can find. And so Kennedy, and should we go on to this now? Are we ready for this now?
I think we're ready to go into it. We'll cover this, and then we'll get into some of the firearms stuff that you've been studying.
Well, actually, that's really part of what I have to say, because when the 4 of them were due to leave to go out on this patrol, this is not recorded in the Royal Commission, but what we can go by is what the weapons were issued to the police at the time. And so the 4, Kennedy and the 3 others, were due to go out on patrol with their Adams 45 caliber handguns. So these are, I'll just show you a picture of what an Adams 45 looks like. So these, is that working there? Can you see that good. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
I need one of
so
those.
That's the Adams 45. Now there's a lot of talk Doesn't matter. That's the gun. So we had a sergeant and 3 troopers were going out, and that's all they were going to have. Now, at the time they were about to leave, a gold escort rode into town, and that gold escort, stagecoach obviously, had 1 police officer with it, and that police officer was carrying a government issued rifle and Schneider. Remind me, what's the weapon? The rifle?
Oh, it's either Snyder, it's probably a Martini Henry with a 5.77 Snyder cartridge.
That could be.
Or it could be a Snyder.
Yeah. I don't want to look at my records here and get sidetracked. So when you say it was a Snyder cartridge, Schneider's the name that comes to mind. That was the weapon that the gold escort officer was carrying. So he rides into town, and a sergeant from the police force says to him, "Oh, great, I'm taking that rifle." So by sheer chance, he takes that police issue rifle off the gold escort, and he takes that. Once he gets that rifle, he thinks to himself, actually, it's not a bad idea that we're a bit better armed. So he goes to the local minister, and he says to the minister of the town that he knows the minister has a shotgun, and he asks the minister if he can borrow the shotgun, and the minister lends him the shotgun. So that's then what they ride out of town with. What's interesting to note is that all of the police officers had never had any formal weapons training at all. They had to buy their own ammunition. The Adams was only recently introduced, and it's thought that none of them had ever fired their handguns before, and none of them had ever fired the Schneider before. That's what they go out on. They go out on patrol with those. They only ride a very short distance from town. You've got to remember we're on horses. It's slow. They're not rushing, and they come to the burnt hut at Stringybark Creek, which is a good place to make camp because there's a large fallen tree. It makes a good shelter for them to set up camp. So there, I think, again from memory, I should point out the things that I think from memory. I think they were only 6 miles, 10 kilometers by horse, remember, into the scrub from town when they set up their first camp. They are all of the view that the Kellys are nowhere around. They think that they've got no chance of seeing the Kellys for some time, if at all, and it's just a quiet, peaceful camp. What they don't know is the Kelly hideout is only 1 mile away from where they are. And again, it's highly likely that a sympathizer or somebody hoping for some reward from the Kellys, when the police left, that the sympathizer left to warn the Kellys that there was a patrol out looking for them. So the night passes. One of the officers, and I think that's McIntyre. He takes what he says about this in the Royal Commission is he takes the Schneider as dusk setting because he's going to go and see if he can shoot a kangaroo for tea, for food. So he goes off with the rifle. Yeah. So we won't talk about that too much because you probably get a $50,000 fine these days if you shot a kangaroo because they're protected. but back then he went off. But fact is, he never saw a kangaroo. The reason I mention that is because he never ever had an opportunity to fire that gun. So he comes back. They've got no food. He never got any game. And they pass the night. When the next morning dawns, Sergeant Kennedy and Constable Scanlon, are going to go off on patrol. They're going to go for a bit of a ride, see what they can see. The other 2 are going to stay in camp, make the camp a bit better, and prepare some food. And so after they've left, McIntyre, and the thing I'll say right now about McIntyre is McIntyre was interviewed because McIntyre survives the shooting. He was interviewed shortly after it happened. He made his own notes shortly after it happened. He was interviewed at the Royal Commission, and what they say is the fact that his story never changed. All the time, he maintained his story. So his account, and thank God he survived, because if he hadn't survived, those 4 men would probably have ridden off into the bush and never would have been seen or heard of again. And I know I'm jumping around a bit, but the proof of what I say is that when we come to the end of this story and they're all dead in Glenrowan, what do they find at Glenrowan? When the cops go looking around and searching, they find some of those police horses from the Stringybark massacre saddled and ready to go at Glenrowan. They were still using the police horses. So there's no doubt that if all 4 coppers had been killed, those bodies would have been burned, buried, they would never have been heard of again. So thank God he survived. But what happened is he's in camp, he's preparing a meal for riders. They hear riders coming, they look, 4 riders are riding up. Straight away, one of them, Ned, calls out, bail up. Bail up was the expression they used for stand up. Yeah. Halt a stop a coach if you're going to rob a coach or rob someone, bail up. That's called out. When that happens, the 2 of them, which is McIntyre and Lonergan, they run in opposite directions. McIntyre runs for the tent because the guns are inside the tent. He's not armed. Lonergan, not armed either, and he runs for this big tree that they were using as a barrier for the campsite. And gunfire erupts, and McIntyre sees that Lonergan's hit and drops, and he's killed instantly. So he's dead. There's the first policeman that's dead. McIntyre throws up his hands and surrenders and doesn't try and get into the tent. And why is he not shot and killed? Well, you would think that if you're thinking like Ned, maybe he wants to ask him, where are the other 2? What do you know? Would you know where we are? Wants to interview him. For whatever reason, he's not immediately shot. And then they get off the horses. Interrupt me if I get into too much detail here. But
go ahead. We got lots of time.
I don't think we're the kind of too much detail kind of people. I think we like detail.
We are long format. If you didn't watch a couple weeks ago, we did a 4.5 hour chat on the Indian Wars, so you're doing just fine.
Well, I'm probably going to run out of voice before then. But where we're at now is that Ned puts his own handcuffs on McIntyre and is interviewing him, and through a course of conversation where, you know, if you're held by a bad guy, you're certainly going to try and come across as being cooperative and friendly and understanding and all these sort of things to get the best treatment you can, maybe not to be killed. And so what happens is, and thank goodness this happens, is that Ned relents and takes the handcuffs off McIntyre. So the next step, I guess, of this is that riders are heard to be approaching. It's Kennedy and Scanlon coming back. They are told, bail up, bail up. Kennedy, the sergeant, sees they're all armed and, according to McIntyre, calls out, don't shoot, don't shoot. You know, let's talk about this, don't shoot. And at the same time, Scanlon is simply trying to dismount from his horse. The gunfire erupts. They shoot at the 2 police, the Kelly gang, the 4 of them. They shoot at the 2 police officers. Kennedy falls from his horse. Scanlon is seen to have 1 foot in the stirrup and falls from his horse. And at that point, one of the 2 horses, in all this gunfire and people falling off, panics and just takes off. And when that horse just takes off in fear, it goes to crash past McIntyre. And as it go past McIntyre, McIntyre says he never even thought the horse is about to hit him. He grabbed the saddle and swung up into the saddle, not through fancy horsemanship or practice or anything, just through sheer adrenaline, spur of the moment, life-saving action. And as he tears off into the bush, gunfire, he knows gunfire is following him. Not sure if the horse was wounded or not, but really that is how McIntyre got away, because it's safe to assume that they would have executed him. They would not have allowed him to survive. And really, the proof of that is that when they did get when they came and found Kennedy's body, so they saw that the other two had been shot and killed, but the thing about Kennedy's body is he had a bullet wound, but then he had another bullet wound in his armpit, and he had a bullet wound in the head. And the assumption from the autopsy was that he was alive and shot in the armpit when he had his hands up in surrender, and that the bullet in the head was a coup de grace sort of thing, that he was badly wounded and going to die, and the four blokes wanted to leave, and so they shot him in the head. And later, when he was arrested, Ned confessed to all of that, confessed to shooting Sergeant Kennedy when he had his hands up, and and said, you know, he was really badly wounded and shot him in the head. And of course, and yet again stole his watch, and that watch was a family heirloom, and had the watch on him when he was captured. When Ned was captured, he still had that watch on him at Glenrowan, and that was returned to Kennedy's wife and children.
Well, it's pretty hard to argue against that. I'll give you that much. It's pretty hard to argue that as a good move.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So the myths that are out there, you know, that they were there was some sort of equal gunfight, that it was a self-defense gunfight, but time and time again, thank goodness, that Royal Commission happened, where 60 witnesses were interviewed. And in a Royal Commission, when you're interviewed, you have judges of the High Court judges, the high hierarchy in the judiciary are on the panel, and you have most senior experienced lawyers, and they are interviewing and cross-examining people who've sworn on the Bible and been warned of the penalty for telling lies at a Royal Commission. And so they're the stories that people don't want to hear, about how it was 4 on 2, and then again it was 4 on 2, and how the guys never even got to fire their weapons. The police never even got to fire their weapons.
And well, getting shot under the armpit's kind of hard to do if your hands are down.
Yeah, Arizona Ghost Rider is in here. He said the Ned Kelly story is terrific. Glad we're hearing about it. Good. That's Santee over there.
No, that's great.
Let's go on to the next part. Where are we at now? What happens next? Is this getting close to what I consider what we talk about, the manifesto? Is that what comes next, or I'm just jumping the gun, or is there something else?
You know, look, there's a few other things to talk about, but I think if seeing you've brought up the manifesto, we can talk about it now. And so the manifesto is that there was going to be a civilian population revolt to create the Republic of Northeast Victoria, and basically, when you look in history at the manifesto and the Republic and the revolt of the general population, you will not find any mention whatsoever of that prior to the year 1960. And I stress, I'm not made a mistake there. I'm saying 1960, you know, LSD, hippies, and all that sort of stuff. And that is when an Australian historian who I have his name, but I'm not going to name him. He writes about this document being found on Kelly when he was arrested, and that it was all hushed up and put in a secret vault by the Victorian government, because nobody must know that Victoria was in an uprising, and the public that they were going to create this republic in the northeast of Victoria. No mention of that anywhere in the Royal Commission, police records, anyone's notebook pre-1960. And one journalist a few years later wrote a story where he said that he had seen that manifesto with his own eyes, and was writing the story in support of this historian's claim. And since that time, no one on this planet claims to have seen that manifesto apart from the historian and the one journalist. No one else. So it's complete rubbish.
If the manifesto was real, what harm would it do 80 years later
to release it?
Release it, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, actually, that's a question that I've never even considered, because basically it's just such a ridiculous thing that.
Yeah, I just don't see how that would matter. Like, why would they need to hide it away? It's 80 years later. Everybody's dead usually at that time.
Yeah,
nothing matters.
Snapper and I discuss this about every day. That's the plague of the pre-internet era, as far as when someone who was slightly even respected as a historian writes something in a book, whether they researched it or not, people snatch it up and it becomes gospel to them overnight, and there's no way to. And then you have, until years later, you'll have that just being regurgitated over and over and over again until it becomes the truth, no matter what you say. So.
Yeah, and you really got to sit down and say, does that make sense? That doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
And I can tell you guys, I worked for the government for many, many years. All my 20s, I worked for the government. There was nothing really crazy I ever saw. The biggest secret was there was no secrets. No real crazy secrets. Everything was common sense stuff, like people's names, movements, that kind of stuff. There was no like, whoa, this really cool technology. I actually was pretty upset because I was like, most people with an iPhone have better technology than what we're using. So there's nothing that I ever saw anyways. And I had a pretty high clearance, and I never saw anything that was like, whoa. A couple things that were neat, but nothing like, whoa, they're hiding stuff from the guys.
Sam Sebastian said, and I don't know if you agree with this or not, because I don't know, but he said the myth of the Republic was invented by Ian Jones, who wrote Ned Kelly, A Short Life and a Work of Fiction. I have no clue. So I'm careful about reading the comments tonight. They've already got me once.
They did.
All I'm going to say is, yes, that is the name that I didn't mention.
Oh, so that's like R.R.L. Wilson.
Yeah,
So really,
I think that is the same R.L. Wilson.
Snapper and I have one
There's
guy.
One in every single historian.
We study cult history, and there's one man named R.L. Wilson who went through the 50s, not 50s, the 60s and 70s, and just wrote tons of books. And he actually went to prison for fraud because he sold a bunch of Colt revolvers that weren't.
Well, he never got to go to prison. The people that worked around him went to prison. He ended up getting the. It was too late between when he got caught, so I forgot. I can't think of the name of the right now, but the amount of time had gone past since the crime, so they couldn't charge him for it.
Yeah,
he ended up getting fines and other stuff on other areas, but the really bad stuff he missed prison time on.
He was part of a huge fraud ring that continuously made up false history about Colt firearms, and to this day, you will find people that everything they know is from R.L. Wilson, and you can't tell them any different because that was written in a book once, and that's just that's the facts, I guess now. But
I can tell you there's so many famous guns that might not even be what they're claimed to be that
we're getting off track though now, Snapper.
Yeah, we're getting off track. Sorry.
That's my fault. I dragged it up.
No. I just think, and I'll just touch on this really quickly, is that I find it's very interesting that I was not prepared to name that the historian here, because I'm just not sure how we all stand with.
Oh no, I love kicking historians when they're down. Don't worry.
But the litigation side of things is what I don't understand with YouTube. So if there's anything I'm ever slightly worried about, I say contentious, I'm not going to say.
If a historian's worth their weight in gold, they should be able to argue their points without litigation.
Yeah. Anyway,
that's my set on it.
So I think we've finished now with the manifesto, because what I think that brings me to, of course, is the Jerilderie letter and various other documents that Ned Kelly is said to have written. And so that's another thing that I want to clear up here, is that Ned Kelly was a juvenile delinquent with no schooling and could barely read and write. And in the police files, there exists a letter written by Ned Kelly, which was where he was threatening in an obscene way someone who had made an allegation against him. This is very, very early in his career, well before even the organized cattle stick horse stealing. And that letter that he wrote is appalling. In the handwriting is almost indecipherable. You can't decipher it, and the spelling is it's like you can't even spell the word the. His spelling.
Well, he was a Samuel Colt.
Atrocious. And so what happens later is we've got these letters, the Jerilderie letter and all of the couple of other letters that he's supposed to have written, one to a politician. And when you see these, they are written in not only in a beautiful flowing hand, but they are written in a language that Ned Kelly would have been incapable of. His education would never have allowed him to write, to create such beautiful speech. And so, of course, people go on about, the various letters he wrote to Parliament, to politicians, and the famous Jerilderie letter. And the reality is he never wrote them. Let's not even debate the pros and cons. He never wrote them. He was incapable of it. There was a school teacher, Wallace, I think is the surname, and the school teacher was a copious, obsessed writer. He wrote letters to everybody about anything, and he was a Kelly supporter, and they have now found that they've done some handwriting comparisons, and although in a court of law today, handwriting, like fingerprints, you've got to have a number of points.
They can use
before it's guaranteed. In handwriting, it's the same. You have to have a number of same points in handwriting to be able to say that is definitely Steve Westmacott's handwriting. And so what they've got is not enough for a court of law, but enough to show predominantly, I think it's the letter Y. When in cursive, the letter Y is written. Wallace, right, I think I've got this right, but basically he writes it as an 8. It looks more like an 8 than a letter Y, and that is one of the main things that shows it was the school teacher, Wallace, who was helping Ned and wrote all those letters for Ned. And maybe Ned said to him, I want to say I hate the bloody coppers. And so Wallace would have written, I, Ned Kelly, loathe and despise the local constabulary, because Ned wouldn't even know what that meant, but Wallace interpreted it for him. And of course, the other thing about Wallace is when you say, oh, no, come on, are you sure Wallace was a supporter? Wallace had a reputation for the fact that when on his days off and when he was traveling, so Wallace was a school teacher at 2 separate schools, and that enabled him to travel the countryside because he had to travel between 2 schools teaching. And when he was traveling around the place, what do you reckon Wallace loved to buy? Wherever he could, he would call into a farm and say, have you got any plough bits you want to sell? And then he would buy the plough bits. And when people would say, oh, what do you want these for? He'd say, oh, my dad's a blacksmith. He's always after. And when you look at Wallace's family, he had no blacksmiths in his family whatsoever. What was he a collector of old plough bits? I don't think so. We know where those.
He was the very
plough
first
bits.
collector of old plough bits.
We're getting to my favorite part of this story.
Yeah.
Okay, so we talk about plowshares, and I've been around a lot of plowshares in my life. And they talk about plow bits. Are we talking about the plow spade? Or are we talking about some other part of a handheld plow? Because it looks like these are made out of the plow spades, but those things are so heavy. You know what I mean? Or maybe they weren't that heavy then?
It would stop. It would stop the bullet.
I'm stopping you there because you broke up and I never heard anything then. Let's try again.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yep, sorry
about
that. No, that's
fine. We're talking about now, I'm not to spoil anything, but we're starting to get into building a suit of armor.
Yeah.
And I'm going to let you handle all that, but you're talking about him going around and collecting parts of plows.
Yes.
And what I call the plow spade, or some people call it the shear or whatever, is a huge, heavy duty, especially nowadays. They may not have been so heavy then, but you're talking 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch thick steel. So I don't know if you know the answer to this or not, but were they that heavy?
So the first thing is that the plows were a lot smaller. I guess that's what we're getting at. So when you look at them today being pulled by massive tractors, then maybe they are big and huge. But when you look at Australia back then, and often it was a single blade plow, single blade on the plow, and really it's about the size of a pillowcase. Probably if you shaped a pillowcase, that's what we're looking at, about the size of a shaped pillowcase. And so that's the sort of material he was collecting up for use. And again, I'll just talk, and if you need to double back on something. So when we're talking about
one thing though, we need to make one of these. By the way, we need to make one of these suits of armor.
I actually have my brother Caleb working on one right now.
I
was going to open this in the suit of armor, but we couldn't get it done in time. But go ahead, we'll do it in July.
What is so fantastic about this is that it's going to be great if we do something, or if you do something later with the suit of armor when it's finished, because the truth about the suit of armor is, let's forget about Ned wearing the armor and using the armor. We need to go back a bit. We need to go back to 1873. And in 1873, Beechworth was a very large, extremely financial community with a lot of middle-class people in it. And so every year they had the Beechcraft Fair. And when they had the Beechcraft Fair, they wanted to make sure that there would be something at that fair every year that blew people away, because they never would have seen it before. And so in 1873, at the Beechcraft Fair, they had, all the way from Germany, a German cavalry soldier's suit of armor on display.
Wow.
And so
bet you that's exactly where it came from.
And people went to the fair and they saw this suit of armor. Oh, wow. Now, who was actually working at a hard job 6 days a week, probably slaving over a furnace at this time, was a guy called Tom Strahair. So it's spelled Straughar. And he was a blacksmith working at his brother's foundry, a proper foundry, the right temperatures for working steel. What is thought is that in his spare time, in his after hours time, the guy was so taken by the German suit of armor that he decided to make one for fun, for his house, as an ornament. He was going to make this suit of armor. And so he started making this suit of armor. Now, the story is that after he'd got this suit of armor made, who was it? Which one of it was? Oh, Joe Brian, Joe. That Joe saw the suit of armor after Tom had made it and thought, wow, this would be a great idea for outlaws to wear this suit of armor. And he went back and told Ned about it, said it, and convinced Ned. Ned wasn't keen, but he convinced Ned that this would be a great idea. And so that's why when you look at the suits of armor that were captured, the 4 suits, they're not the same, and they're not the same quality, and that they can be seen that each, you can put them in a line of 4 as to the quality of the 4, and they're becoming less effective, less well made, more quickly made. But the other thing is that in the 2000s, you know, you have these documentary TV shows like Time Team and these other shows that, you know, they've got much bigger budgets than we've got.
Yeah.
They did an episode where they actually had I'm hopeless with pronouncing these words, the metallurgy
yes,
of the armor tested. And what that can show is that some of the armor must have been done at a foundry where there was sufficient temperatures to raise the metal to this temperature to work it. But most of the armor was done at what's called a bush forge, which is out in the bush somewhere, just with wood, maybe still with bellows to try and get it hot, but not at foundry type temperatures. And that is what's come up about the armor. And of course, because I've already touched on it, there's a witness at the Royal Commission who was in the hotel when the fighting all started, and already the guys had been wounded once or twice because their arms were still exposed, and when bullets were coming through the hotel walls and the bits of timber, Ned said to Joe, and he's quoted as saying, "I always said this bloody armor would bring us to grief." And that is where they get the Royal Commission comes to the finding that it was never Ned Kelly. Not only was it never Ned's idea, he never dreamt it up, and he wasn't even keen, and that it was Joe that pushed for it. And of course, there's even more. I guess we'll come to that when we get to Glenrowan about it. But I think the other thing is Ned's armor weighed 95 pounds, and you know, it's all very well to be standing there in this suit, but I don't want to get too far ahead, but how are you going to get on a horse when you're wearing a suit like that? If you've ever seen how medieval knights got on their horses, often a medieval knight wearing plate armor was on a crane. Let's just use that terminology. It was actually on a crane and was winched up into the air, opened his legs, the horse was brought in, and then he was lowered onto the horse because the plate armor was so heavy.
But the other thing is medieval armor was made for noble people, and it was fitted piece by piece to them. And so even then, that fitted armor would have been so much easier to move around in than just these huge plates just hanging off of you, you know. So, and like we said, that stuff is not light at all.
Yeah.
So,
and we haven't left that because we will come back to this when we're talking about what actually happened at the end. So, but that,
okay. Where are we, robbing banks now, or what?
Well, I really haven't got a lot I can tell you about the bank robberies because I've not put a lot of that into my mind. He robbed banks. He went in. He got the managers. He got the managers to open safes. He used the threats of the managers against the wives and children of the managers. And really, it's as simple as that. There were never any raids where they rode in like on a Western movie. So it's not a lot I can probably tell you about the bank robberies because I think they're pretty boring and straightforward.
Yeah, it just happens. So
Did
what
he
leads?
ever actually destroy any of the mortgages, or like the people's debt that was listed? Is that true that he actually destroyed that to get people out of debt, or is that just kind of part of everything went missing because of a robbery?
I can't remember. Now that you say that, I remember there's a reason for that, and I can't remember what it was. Again, it's been given a twist that it was done for honourable or Robin Hood reasons.
Right.
And maybe there's somebody who's made a couple of comments here. Was it Sam Sebastian or someone has made a couple of comments that have clearly that person knows what they're talking about. Maybe they can, if they're watching live, they can make a comment now about the burning of documents that happened, because I do remember it, but I can't tell you anything about it. So maybe we'll come back to that if they answer.
Yeah, if they answer, please.
So what sets up? I take it we're moving on to Glenrowan at this point. What sets that whole thing up? I have an idea, but from what you've told me, my idea is probably not correct.
Well, my understanding really is that, and as I sit here now, it's slipped my mind what has triggered this, because Ned was, I guess you'd say he'd really gone completely mad by now, because at this point is when he wants to encourage the police. He cuts the telegraph wires and knows that this will encourage the police to come to Glenrowan, but the plan was never for that stand to take place at Glenrowan. The train was supposed to come and be derailed, and all the police and everyone on the train was supposed to be killed, so that then they could go to another town to rob the bank while the huge diversion of the train derailment took place. And I hate it when I go from memory, but I think what happened is that a person traveling on a previous train saw the telegraph wires were cut and immediately became suspicious and went and told the police, and that the Kellys were at Glenrowan, and the police set off. Yeah, so I think that's what happened, and then somebody got out of the inn. They were knew about the explosives, and so they went to stop the train before it arrived at the point where it was going to be blown up. Yeah,
yeah. So let's talk about Glenrowan. Is this a town? Because I hear about an inn and I hear about stables, or is it just a station? What's the going on with Glenrowan?
No, it was a small. Glenrowan was a small community. It still is today. You can go there and visit the site. And last time I was there, it was a bare piece of ground showing you where the inn was that burned down. And as I said, you can go and see a few other places. The station's still there, historical stations preserved, very small. And the spot where Ned is said to have actually fallen, there's a marker there to show that. But it's a very small community, and the inn owner was a staunch Kelly supporter, and of course, owns an inn selling alcohol. Not the best people from the communities hanging around there, and obviously by being a Kelly supporter is receiving financial gain from being a supporter. But again, when we get to this, there's not really a great deal to tell, because the Kellys were there. They're already thinking the train's going to be derailed. They've had a few drinks. They don't realise that the train's been stopped and that it isn't going to come and get blown up, and that the police are in numbers, which I can't remember how many. The police have now got off the train and have come to the hotel and have told them that they need to surrender. And the police numbers seem to be even greater because a Queensland commissioned police officer had brought a number of black trackers, Aboriginal trackers to Victoria to try and help catch the Kellys, and they had not gone back to Queensland when this happened, and they came as well. So it certainly bolstered the numbers who were at the police numbers at the hotel.
Yeah. Alan Sam Sebastian down here said it was carrying 8, and there were 5 black trackers also with their officer. So is that number ring a bell? Something like that, somewhere in the tune of 13, right. 12, 13, or 14.
Yep, that's right. Yep, that's
in good. Which, if we go to the movies, there's always about, there's 50 or 60 or maybe even more of them there, and so it's kind of a historical inaccuracy, I believe, at this point to say that there's huge numbers of officers there.
No, I think that so. And again, I've said this earlier, but because we're at Glenrowan now. What we got to again remember is that most of these blokes have never had. We're not talking army blokes. Most of these blokes have had no training. They've just been on the job learning, if you like, of basic policing, and suddenly they're handed a rifle they may never ever have fired before, never had any practice how to shoot it, load it, aim, hit a target, and there they are with these rifles. And the other thing we can't get our head around now, because we've got modern brains, we can never get our head around this, is the fear. The fear these blokes would have had. I'm just an ordinary copper. Day to day, what I deal with is a husband and wife having an argument, or somebody down the street saying they paid too much for half a dozen eggs, and suddenly I am with the world's most famous, dangerous, mass murdering outlaw, and they want me to shoot at this bloke. All I want to do is hide in the bottom of this ditch, And so that
is important. That is important to say. I mean, that there's so much that goes on in life that people don't really understand how difficult it is until they actually do it. Like even this is actually kind of nerve-wracking sometimes.
Yeah, but because Snapper, am I allowed to say that you have served your country? I've said it now anyway. Yeah. But I think the thing is, but when you do this, when you do that training, you go into the army knowing what the army is. You go into the army knowing that you stand a good chance of being shot at. You have a lot of practice.
Especially during my time,
we're at war to defend yourself, and then you actually get to experience live rounds being fired over your head, throwing live grenades. You do, and this is for real. You could get killed doing this. Yeah. So then we go back to the 1880s to a copper who maybe has just come out from Ireland where his mum and dad were growing potatoes badly. He comes out, joins the police force, goes to a local town, and then suddenly somebody's going to be shooting at him when this has never, ever happened before.
He just wanted a good job and a house for his family. Yeah. I understand that completely. That's crazy.
So you were talking earlier, not to get off, but I believe that you and Snapper, when I was off earlier talking to Duke, you guys were discussing a couple of very important revolvers that might be involved in this thing, right? Am I right? Mm-hmm. You want to go into that before we get started?
Yeah, it'd be perfect time to do it.
The
Whitney?
Okay, I misunderstood you there, because by the time of Glenrowan, they weren't carrying the Whitney. So we'll jump back a bit in time, and we'll go back to when I said about Ned doing the furious riding, and he got into a few scrapes. So back then the police were using the Whitney revolver, and that was cap and ball, and it looked exactly like the Colt Navy. So for people that, I'm sure most people watching this channel know their guns, but basically the Colt Navy's got the lever underneath so that you can make your own cartridges in the cylinder, but you can still fire 6 shots. So that's what the Victorian police were issued when in the early days of Ned's misdemeanors, and no ammunition whatsoever issued to the police officers. They were responsible for their own ammunition, and there was no requirement for practice. And one of those police officers, may well have been Kennedy, is recorded in his diary that had not shot a firearm for 5 years previously. And so the Victorian police at that time had a reputation. This isn't a bad thing, this is just how it was at the time, that they carried their Whitneys only with the caps on. So on the back of the guns, you guys understand this completely, but for people that might be just watching this for Ned's story, they only had the handguns, had a cap on the back, powder in the cylinder, and a lead charge pushed on the end. Snapper's going to show us one.
So for anybody who doesn't know this, most of our people here probably do, but for people who are watching this later, if you'll see there's nipples on these guns, and you would put a cap on that, which the cap, when the hammer comes down, it would strike the cap, causing the cap to fire, which would then set the powder off, shooting the lead projectile out of the barrel.
Thank you. Excellent.
Do you have a Remington there, Snapper?
I do. I have that original Remington.
Yeah, grab that, because the Whitney looks a lot like that Remington.
Yeah.
Actually, if you guys have held a Spiller and Burr, that is a Whitney, but that's pretty close. It's not exactly the same. The loading lever is a little bit different.
Yeah.
But the Whitney looked a lot like that.
So
and I have explained. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
You've explained that really well about the nipples that hold the caps, and that is what the Victorian police, they would only put, and I'm not just saying Victoria, perhaps other states did this too, but they would only put the caps on there because what they were primarily interested in was horse desensitization. When you're riding your horse, you do not want your horse to be spooked by anything, and it's particularly gunfire. And if you're riding out on patrol around the farms and somebody uses their shotgun to shoot quail for the pot, you don't want you. And so they had the caps, and they would fire them to get the horses desensitized to gunfire. Just how the light horse did it, and it was in the light horse manual for 1914, and that's the Victorian police did it. And it's a deterrent, because coppers these days are told you never fire a warning shot. Warning shot's bullshit. It's Hollywood. If you shoot, you shoot to kill. So that means don't get your gun out unless it's war. But in those days, there is one incident where Ned was misbehaving, and a couple of shots were fired, and it was only done, there were no bullets. It was only the caps. And it's like, wake up, calm down, behave. Does the person really know that it's only a cap? It's a deterrent more than anything. And so that was the weapon early in Ned's days. And what we move on to is that any of the handguns by the police at Glenrowan were then the Adams .45 cartridge revolver. And I'm sorry, the one other thing I'll quickly jump in there is, if anyone then says, hang on, how come they were using cap and ball pistols so long after the introduction of the cartridge? Two reasons the Victorian police and other police forces in Australia were still using cap and ball was they didn't want to spend money. They didn't have a budget. They had appalling budgets. The government gave the police appalling budgets. So they didn't have the money to upgrade weapons. They were usually buying secondhand. In this era, they were buying secondhand used products from America, or obsolete from America. And the other reason I've forgotten. So yeah, there were two reasons. They were cheap. Oh, and the other reason was, if you look in the records of the day, the cartridge is unreliable. It'll never take off. We'll go back to, much like how they said the automobile will never be successful.
Never
it's a
be
fad. The same as the early days of the cartridges. So, all right, that covers the.
I still tell everybody that smokeless powder is just a fad.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And it's really great you've said that, because you've reminded me the Adams .45 was obviously black powder. It's called the Adams .45 black powder. Not,
Yeah.
I don't, yeah.
And one more quick thing, guys, on the caps. The older caps were thicker, quite a bit more powerful. So it wasn't like shooting off caps today. This probably would have sounded, especially if you're not normally listening to a pistol going off.
Mhm.
The officer would have known, but you might not have realized that it was just a cap firing.
One more thing to add to that. Today I was at a historical reenactment and I'd heard something I'd never heard, talking about officers having shooting competitions indoors, and they wouldn't even load ball. They would just load the cap, and then they would step back from a candle and see how far away they could get, because the blast of air just from the cap to put the candle out would have to be pretty precise. And so they were, and I'd never heard that until today. So
That's pretty cool. We got to try that one day.
Yeah.
But we need to move on. We're getting sidetracked again a little bit.
Yeah,
but
sorry,
let's
guys.
go on with the story.
Well, I guess we know how many coppers are there now. We know the plan's fallen a bit, has fallen through, that the explosion isn't going to take place. We know that the gang, the four of them, are at the hotel. They tend to have something of an advantage over the police because the police know they've got hostages inside. The guys have all still got their armor on in the hotel, and I guess that's where we're up to.
Mm-hmm.
When gunfire starts, and I think, again, how do you talk for a long time about something that's over pretty quickly? Because gunfire starts, the most senior of the police officers is wounded. That really is part of the reason why he's badly wounded, and that's part of the reason why it sort of goes into a bit of a stalemate, because the police, a bit like if you have the expression in America, we say a headless chook, which means they're sort of they're leaderless, and I guess the next thing is that Joe. It is Joe, I'm pretty sure, that's the first one hit, and that's simply because, so anyway, we've got gunfire, we've got Ned wounded, we've got Joe wounded, they're all taking small wounds, and then Joe goes up to the bar for a drink. Great point about the armor, he can't lift his arm wearing the armor, so he lifts the armor up so that he can have a drink, and bullet comes through the wall, and sheer chance. So there's one of the fours dead. He drops dead. So there's Joe dead. And then I hope I got that right. So that he was the first one. And then darkness is falling. Ned is wounded. What comes out later is that Ned was going to, the stories are made up to try and make Ned out to be some sort of hero. The reality is Ned was going to try and escape, forget the others, leave them behind. He was just running to save himself. Comes outside, can't even carry his rifle anymore, drops his rifle, goes to where his horse is, realizes he can't get on his horse, and then lies down to rest. He already has a couple of wounds. I think it's lower and upper arm, left arm. And anyway, so then night passes, and in that time, bullets are going into the hut. Nobody knows what's going on. There's no decent leadership there. Dawn breaks. When dawn breaks, that's when they see Ned standing. They open fire on Ned. Ned tries to shoot back, and he's dropped. And then they set fire to the hotel. The other two, so there's never at any time are there four armored men facing the police. The police don't really know what's going on, because at this time of the dawn and shooting Ned, they don't know Joe's dead. They don't know what's happened to the other two that are still in the hotel. They set fire to the hotel. When they're finally able to go in, a priest goes in first, because they're still not sure if people are alive in there. by this time, the hostages had well and truly all run out. When they go in, they find that the priest first finds Joe's body, Joe's dead, and then finds 2 more bodies lying side by side with heads on pillows. And the autopsies are unable to determine if the 2 lying there died of smoke inhalation, self-inflicted wounds, or if they just died of their wounds. But the reason people think that they committed joint suicide is because they had their heads on pillows. They were lying side by side with their heads on pillows. So it's not like they were dropped in different parts of the hotel or overtaken by smoke when they were guarding different doors. They're lying side by side with their heads on pillows. And so really, in a lot of ways, it's massively anticlimactic.
Yep. Go ahead.
Sorry.
Go ahead. I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
No. All I was going to say is really, then we hear later at the Royal Commission that one of the hostages clearly heard Ned say that the armour would bring them to grief, and we know that Ned says later to the police that he couldn't get on his horse, and Ned also tells the police, not that he really needed to, but he also told the police that the armour was designed that, just like you mentioned earlier about how it was put on you by your squires when you were a medieval knight. Well, these guys, they had to put their own armour, on each other. And so one of the reasons Ned couldn't get away, they followed the blood trail. They can see the blood trail where Ned came out of the inn, where he dropped his rifle and a woolen hat, a woolen cap. And then they can see the blood trail went to the horse, and they can see blood on the horse, and they can see the blood trail came back to where he was caught. And so the reality was Ned, by himself, wounded, couldn't get the armor
Couldn't
off.
get it off.
That's
Couldn't lift his
exactly
arms high
right.
enough. Now, I hear a lot about the policeman that shot him in the back of the legs with the shotgun to bring him down. Do you know anything about that?
No.
Okay.
No, I'm not going to talk about something I haven't got information of. So no, I haven't. I can't tell you about that.
That's actually
I
That-
can't
that's
remember
good.
what happened.
that's a good way to be about it, because that's usually where I stick my foot in my mouth. But
So what is what I can say though is that he was shot twice in one arm, once in the opposite hand. So I think it's left arm upper lower, right hand, and a foot. And when you see the famous photograph of him that's taken in the Victorian prison in Melbourne, there's a famous photo of him taken. And what you might not know, because it's often not there, is that his foot injury was so bad, and he was still injured when he was in prison suffering from his wounds, that he's actually got a stand behind him propping him up. And so he was pretty badly wounded.
I'm just going to throw in a few things that I know, because I know a couple of guys. I don't know them personally, but I've been following them for years, even before YouTube. They were doing this kind of stuff up in Canada, who built a set of Ned Kelly armor to spec. And the first thing they talked about was the guy had been a trained military man. He was Canadian. He'd been Royal Mounted Police. He'd been in their army. And he was like, I have never had a pack of military gear that weighed the same amount, because he was packing 80 pounds in his military gear. This was 90-pound armor. But what he said was the way it hangs off of you is so detrimental. He said the way it hangs, because it's not fitted to your body, is what makes it so heavy and so hard to use. Everything on a historical medieval suit of armor, it's fitted, so a lot of the weight will be at your waist, on your chest, your shoulders, your head. Whereas a bad suit of armor, like what they got, everything hangs on your shoulders. And so you're just, But what
And
they
that's
said
how
was,
modern body armor's made as well. It's meant to hang all over your body, not just on your shoulders, so you don't feel it.
He was like, it was extremely heavy. You couldn't move. They actually did some test with it with a, I believe they used the Henry Martini Henry, but I don't know if exactly what gun that was they used there. But of the 5.77 Snyder round, it was impressive how hard that gun was hitting that armor and even denting it. And they shot the helmet and put a decibel reader inside the helmet, and they came to the conclusion you would be deaf within 2 or 3 shots. The other thing they found was the reason he probably threw the rifle away is because they never thought of it till they tried it. There was no way to shoulder the rifle and get your eye alignment that's up here in this slit down to the sights of the rifle unless you hold the rifle out. Well, that's when they went to the pistols, and you could use pistols, but you could not properly shoulder a rifle in that armor. So that's just what I know about it. But anything else you guys want to add?
Yeah, I want to jump in first, Snapper, if I can. Yeah. So again, going back to the Royal Commission, it's interesting you mentioned 90 pounds and how heavy that was. So the Royal Commission had Ned's armor at 95 pounds. So, we are talking a lot of weight. And
a lot of weight.
When you're talking about lifting the arms, the thing, again, about the Royal Commission is that Ned had been shot twice in the left arm and once in the right hand, and he couldn't, even if he hadn't have had the armor, he still might not have been able to shoot the rifle. And the only way he could shoot the handgun, and I'm hoping I've got this the right way around, was because the left hand was still operating, even though the arm wasn't, and this arm was, even though this hand wasn't, and that he could put this arm under this arm, under the wounded arm, and still attempt to shoot the handgun with a working hand, even though there's 2 wounds in the arm. And so
it makes sense. You would figure out ways to do things if your life is depending on it. You'll figure it out.
Yeah. And I know I said this again, but I'm just going to reiterate because of what the Canadians said, and I like what they've said because the witnesses in the inn at the time say that Joe went up to the bar and wanted to have a drink and be a bit of a braggart and had to lift the armor away because that was the only way he could get his cup to his mouth. And in that brief time is when he got shot and killed. So that agrees with what they said about how awkward the armor was.
Modern body armor also, it's very hard to move around in. It's much more difficult than you would expect. It limits your arms from crossing a lot. It's the same kind of thing where you have a direct center area that will keep your shoulders from being able to fully articulate around it. So you lose a lot of your mobility. Even firing a rifle can be a pain in the butt in full body armor.
Yeah. So let's move on. They capture him alive. He's not dead yet. Right?
Yeah. Well, that's. I think where do we end the story? Because that's pretty much what happens. He's caught alive. Again, you could say, it was no hero that wanted to shoot it out to the end. He was happy to be taken alive and confessed to very many things. Once he was arrested, he freely confessed to a few things, and I think the main thing that sticks in my mind is that he confessed to shooting Kennedy when Kennedy had his hands in the air, and the fact of the coup de grace, shot because he was badly wounded. They put him out of his misery, and the autopsy did show that Kennedy might have survived if McIntyre had gone and got help and help came back. Kennedy might have survived. It wasn't a case where he was definitely going to die.
Oh, wow. I thought he was going to die and they would just put him out of his misery, but that's different.
Yeah.
And I guess the last, just in case we go nowhere else now, the last thing, of course, is that in Australia, there's an expression that we use in Australia, which is such is life. Such is life. And, of course, this is what...
Are you going to tell me he never said that?
He never said that.
No, you're ruining the movie.
No, I wish I actually have what he actually said. So there was enough people present that were the execution to record, educated people to record his last words, and he never, ever said, "Such is life." I'm so sorry to tell you that.
Oh, well.
And of course, in Australia, you could virtually go into any tourist shop. You don't have to be in Victoria.
Yeah.
You can be in any tourist shop in Australia, and you will buy your Ned Kelly T-shirt, which is either Ned Kelly's bearded face or Ned Kelly in his helmet, and the caption will read, "Such is life."
Such is life.
And of course, it's as real as buying your Bugs Bunny cartoon T-shirt that says "That's all, folks," or it's rabbit season. You know, I mean, it's just not real.
Unfortunately, that's how most things are in life. There's so much.
I knew as soon as you started to talk about it, I thought he's going to say he never said that. Do it.
Yeah, I thought that was funny.
That's the sad part about history. A lot of it gets made up, you know, and a lot of it going back to print the legend. But well, we pretty well covered it. Oh, one thing, one of Guards of Logs came in here and said I read that he was still wearing a sash under his armor during the shootout. I've heard that, and that's probably going to be not true too, but I heard that he got the sash from someone he saved his drowning as a kid or something like that. I don't know if you can report to any of that.
Now, this is another confession time. Yes, there was a sash. I had completely forgotten it until you mentioned it here, and I cannot remember what happened with that sash. And that's a shame. I can't dispel some myth or other, but no, I can't remember the sash. Anything about it? No.
That's just fine. Not many people can talk for a straight 2 hours the way you did.
Yeah.
The storytelling bar on this show has been set pretty high by you and Duke Fraser Productions. Between the two of y'all, it's pretty hard to beat.
Oh.
But
that's very, very kind of you to say that, and I actually look forward to seeing the criticism or feedback, and I'm going to hopefully be able to put this on my channel and see if anyone, especially once I go back into my computer and see what's happened from the couple of police sites, Australian police sites that I've told them this was happening. It'll be very interesting to see, because as you can imagine, the police sites are ones that nobody can get on unless they've clearly proven their police service and are known by other people that are actually on that site. And so what tends to get written there, I better not say too much about it.
Better not be giving out any secrets.
So in Australia, we have a saying where you say that you tell things so true to life that you call a spade a effing shovel. You know, I don't know if you have that a similar expression, but those blokes tell it how it is, how they think it is, and so I'm very keen to see what they think about this video.
Yeah, that actually is great. That's great. Actually, you guys have that. That's pretty cool, and that's refreshing in life. So tired of people beating around the bush.
Oh, well, I just want to add here, because I'm pretty sure I didn't do this. I just want to add that this is the helmet that the South Australia police were wearing at the same time as the Ned Kelly incident took place. That was their helmet. So this was the summer helmet if you're on foot. It was the helmet if you were on horseback. You wore this all year round. And the tunic, so this is their 80. The Victorian police wore the same style in their riding breeches. And
pretty nice
same style, same type tunic. And you can see this shock and dog collar that they had to wear. And so 40-degree day, you can imagine how bad that was. And we've just got here to show you the saddle. This is the saddle mounted. That goes on the girth. That goes on your saddle. So, and it would go back on this on that side of you, so that you can draw your baton. There's the baton from the era, and that last little piece there is the saddle-mounted handcuff pouch. That is what the guys would have had. And this is probably when I told you that Kelly handcuffed at Stringybark Creek, McIntyre. That's what the handcuffs would have been carried in.
Yes.
So there you go.
So, not to give away your location or anything like that, but are you very close to Glenrowan where you live, or are you clear across the continent? I don't even know where you live down there.
That you cut out. I don't care. I don't mind mentioning where I live, but you cut out what you actually asked me.
I was just wondering if you were. I hear you say you've been there before, but I wondered if you were like the vicinity you film in. Is it close to that vicinity? Same terrain, same kind of thing.
I'm guessing 600 kilometers away.
Okay,
so I went there. I went there on a deliberate vacation through the Victorian high country to go to our highest mountain and see a lot of and of course, so I went there and did the whole Kelly country tourist thing, and as a vacation. So when we're talking about the state of Victoria, South Australia, where I live, butts up against Victoria, but I'm on the western side of Victoria, and the whole Kelly debacle, fiasco, whatever you want to call it, that occurred northeast of the state of Victoria. That's where that took place. I live right on the border of the two states. I'm only a few kilometres from being in Victoria myself, even though it's about 600 k's to Kelly country. A long horse ride. A long
horse ride. Yeah, that'd be about like us going up to Wyoming and Montana. So that's a pretty good jaunt.
Yeah, I don't think Cody would be too happy with it if you rode him that far.
That's right. Yeah, poor old Cody. He didn't get much of a mention in this, and part of.
Well, we should mention him. Like, I mean, if anybody, this is it's
his channel.
Fantastic. Exactly. If you are not subscribed to Trooper Cody's Light Horse History, you're wrong. It's a great channel. It's a lot of fun.
Link is to that channel is already in the description. Actually, links to both of these guys' channels down there. So go subscribe. You get a lot of good history.
Thank you, Garrett. Thank you very much, Snapper. But look, I think another one of the reasons is that, I'm obviously a horse lover, and I love my horse and love all our horses. And to think that at one stage, one of the Kellys was apprehended by a policeman, and the reason the policeman stopped him was because of the appalling injury that horse had. And when the policeman went and looked, the injury was caused by I nearly swore then, but was caused because they had physically cut the brand out of the flesh of the horse that they were riding. And that was that's what they were doing. They were altering brands, and in some cases they were cutting out the brands, And I guess America's the same as here, but here it's compulsory to have your horse branded so that you know its age and stuff like that. And so to think of my poor Cody, who stands in my videos and does them so well, to think of some bastard cutting out that brand.
Yeah.
And that just doesn't seem very bright, because you would think somebody who saw a horse with a brand cut off of it might be a little suspicious of what's going on there.
That's just
that
shows you.
And why do most criminals get caught? Because none of them are that bright.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, I think we've said about all that can be said. You guys got anything else? I'm going to go ahead and say, Steve, what you got coming up for videos?
Well, look, if we're going to give a hint, I think I've been doing a lot of the Middle East, the light horse in Egypt and the Sinai of 1914, 1918. And so now I have obtained a World War I Brodie helmet, the steel helmet that the troops wore in World War I. So I'm going to use that as a good excuse to do a video on the helmet, and then the Australian light horse on their horses in the hell that was the Western Front mud of 1914-18. And there are the next couple of videos that are sort of in pre-production, if you like, because people think horses couldn't have been in trench warfare. So let's dispel a few myths there too. That's what's coming up. Thank you for asking.
That's our favorite thing to do, apparently.
I'm looking forward to that. I love stories of Anzacs on the Western Front. Very undertold part of World War I history. Okay, Snapper.
Absolutely.
What do you got, Snapper? What's coming?
God. a lot.
Is it the Griswold and Gunnison
The
video?
Griswold and Gunnison video will be out soon, guys. I've been saying that for like a month now. It'll be out soon. I did the Dragoon one recently just because it was much easier and faster to edit. And being that the Griswold is so important, I want to make sure the video is perfect.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to just release it and let it be what it is, because it's all in likelihood that that's the only one we've ever seen shot in our lifetime, and
or ever will
see shot again. So one, I want to get more people on it to let shoot it, and two, I want to do the video justice. Until the video is actually good and edited right and is proper, I really don't want to release it, because it's just going to go whoop over most people's head because the guy with the camera isn't very good. So
that's okay. I'm gonna say that we are about to bounce out of here. We got one more chat, and I've done 3 back to back. I usually do 2 a month. We are going to do 3 back to back. I'm going to have one more at the end of next week because I actually had Black Powder Shooter 44 a couple weeks ago, and he had something come up and he couldn't come on. So he is coming on the 4th, I believe, is this Saturday? 4th of June? Yes. And we are going to have him. We will have A American. We will have Squibload. We will have Snapper. Probably have Duke. I think he's coming back. And we're going to have a big show. And it's going to be kind of an end of our fiscal year because June we start harvest and we will not be putting out videos, live streams, comments. We won't even be answering comments because there's no signal where we go to cut wheat. And so that is going to be the end of our fiscal year, and that'll be Saturday. We have one more video coming out tomorrow morning, and I think it's going to be a Fort Larned historical video. It might be one of the gun videos I have lined up. I don't know yet. But anyway, like I said, we have one more chat, guys. It's going to be big. I promise you then you'll get a big break from 11 Bang Bang because I know some people probably have an 11 Bang Bang with burnout. Anyway, all right, guys. When we do come back in July, by the way, we'll have Classic Guns Today on July 2nd. So bear that in mind. Anyway,
Cheers.
Trust in God. Keep your powder dry.
Thank you. See you later. Cheers. Thank you.
Cheers.